Welcome to the Leadership Under the Microscope interview series, Plain Talk by Pragmatic Leaders, a production of JR Global. Today, we continue our series of interviews with innovative leaders from around the world. These episodes convene conversations about their stories and examine the pitfalls, priorities, parameters, and pragmatism of being a leader in the global community. Here is your host, J.R. Klein.
For 10 years, Sarah de Carvalho worked with the BBC and Sky in film and television production in California, Sydney, and London. Inspired by the plight of Brazil's street-connected children, Sarah moved to Brazil, intent on making a difference. With her Master's of Business Engineering, she founded Happy Child International in 1993, and in 2014, she established a sister charity called It's a Penalty. The campaign harnesses the power of major sporting events to raise awareness and inspire action to prevent the exploitation and abuse of children and vulnerable people. As CEO, she works to influence global legislation for long-term systemic change for child protection. Our guest today, Sarah de Carvalho.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The research that we have done on your program, on your passion, highlights a lot of very critical issues in today's world. I would not probably say that they are unique to today's world, but we have new attention being drawn to them. So I would like to begin this conversation by asking you a little bit about what your story is. How did you come to this? What were the decisions that you made to get to this place? And what are you doing?
So before I moved across to the third sector, I worked as a producer of television programs for the BBC and then Sky. So I had a reasonable high profile and personal success, but something inside of me convicted me to take a different path. And there was no script, there was no blueprint. I would have to create one. And therefore the risk increased. But if I failed, at least I would be doing so having tried. I suppose I describe myself as a social entrepreneur. So I left my career in India and I went to Brazil. And I went to Brazil initially thinking I'd only stay for a month. And I went to Brazil because of the situation in those days this is 20 years ago now, of street children living on the streets in Brazil. And when I saw the reality of their situation, my heart broke and my life has never been the same since. And over the years, we've set up 15 projects to rescue and rehabilitate and reintegrate children that are living on the streets, but also from poverty, great poverty in what they call the favelas, the shanty towns, with an emphasis to obviously get them back into school, but also to get them back into their families. And our success rate was quite high. I mean, there was a lot of trial and error. But I think our success rate was over 70% for reintegration back into family. And that was in part because we worked in collaboration, we worked in partnership, which is key. And so, when the child was reintegrated back into their family, then within that shanty town, there were structures to support that family, because of course when you're working with thousands of children, hundreds and thousands of children and teenagers, you can't follow them all up. So over the years, I suppose my leadership role in the third sector was really the same as my leadership role working in the private sector, because it was, at the end of the day, it was all about the service delivery. And, you know, I was still a leader of adults, you know, working across geographical and cultural boundaries. But you know, the service delivery was to vulnerable children and their families. Yes, so today, the work is 90% of that work is now sustainable, self-sustainable, meaning that it is locally run and locally funded, which is a challenge and an achievement in itself. I'm making it sound easy, and it wasn't. And so that original charity was called Happy Child, or Criança Feliz in Portuguese. And it's our partners in Brazil then went on to set up a work in Angola, Africa, where they set up, I think, 3 preschools in Lubango, which is wonderful. And here in the UK, where I'm based, the remaining, we have a project in the northeast of Brazil for girls that have been abused on the streets or in the shantytowns who are pregnant. It's very few projects that exist for these girls, and that it's tough. It's tough to work with these girls, but it's so important because they're having these babies, you know, in situations either on the streets or, you know, in desperate poverty. So that project's been running now for about 4 years, and they're still being supported by staff in my office here in the UK. Do you want to hear about the passion I have now, which is It's a Penalty? So in about 2013, first of all, I need to explain, having lived in Brazil for 10 years, I came in 2006. I came back to the UK, and I set up an office here in the UK, purposely to raise awareness and funding support for the work out in Brazil. And but I would visit regularly. And on one of these visits in 2013, you know how in life there are moments that happen, and everything changes for you. And that's what happened to me on this particular visit. I was in the northeast of Brazil, and we were at the place that I have most passion for in this work is really on the front line. So that's one of the things I'd always do, is go out on the streets with our street team from the charity, visiting, you know, going where the kids are on the streets, going into those places where they are. And on this particular night, because they're out and about at night, I couldn't believe my eyes. There were just this group of young girls, clearly under the age of 18, dressed up to look older than they were, selling themselves or being sold outside a motel, openly on a main street in Recife. And I was with a cameraman at the time, and one of the girls, said that she'd chat to us, and we had to sort of go out of the way where she could be seen by her trafficker in the motel. And she shared her story with us. She was called Rose, and she told us that at the age of 11, she'd been sent to the streets to beg for food or money for food, because there was no food at home. And pretty soon she'd been caught up with a trafficker. And she was 16 when we met her, so 5 years she'd been on the streets. And you know, when you look into somebody's eyes, because they say that the eye is the window of the soul, and she was dead. She was 16, but she was dead inside. And she said to me, "I can take you here and now, where they're selling children as young as 9 and 10 for sex." And she said, "There's no hope for me." But she said, "Please, will you do something to help us?" And the cameraman had to stop filming. He was crying. And on the plane home, I just felt very convicted by a proverb that says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, the rights of all those who are destitute." And I thought to myself, well, Rose can't speak for herself, but I can speak for people like Rose. And Rose represents millions of children around the world that are in a similar predicament. So when I came back to the UK in 2013, I got in contact with my contacts in the media, because as I mentioned earlier, that was my original career. And to cut a long story short, the BBC made a report on the situation in Brazil. And this was the run-up to the World Cup, the Football World Cup in 2014, that, as you know, Brazil hosted. And around about that time, after the report went out, I was approached by the Metropolitan Police. It was confidential at the time, but they were setting up bogus websites to try and catch these people before they got there. And they wanted some information, which we were able to give them. And during one of these meetings in Scotland Yard, they told us about the extraterritorial legislation, which is provisions in law for countries to prosecute their citizens for the abuse of children if it takes place abroad, of which the United States has it, and so does the UK, and so does Brazil. So they said in this meeting, and the police officer said in this meeting, if you run a campaign that just raises awareness about the issue in Brazil, educates about penalties for offenders, and equips everyone with mechanisms by which they can report a crime if they see it, they said it will prevent up to 95% from committing the crime, because most of them are opportunists. So that's what we did. And we ran a campaign. We got some of the biggest names in football. British Airways said, "You make a film, we'll show it in every flight," which we did. We had a launch here at the centre of the Child Protection Centre here in London. We got a lot of media coverage because the media were looking for other stories other than football. We partnered with the Brazilian government, who, of course, through Happy Child, we'd worked with previously for a long time. And anyway, to cut a long story short, there were 11,252 calls during the Football World Cup. That number we promoted on our campaign platforms, reporting child abuse and exploitation during the Football World Cup. So after that, everyone was like, well, that was a dress rehearsal. You know, Brazil are about to host the Summer Olympics and Paralympics in 2016. Now that's when I set up a separate charity called It's a Penalty. And around about that time, I did an MBA at Surrey University over 2 years. And that, I think that really gave me, you know, the sort of confidence to set this other charity up, which is very much has a global platform on a greater level than Happy Child has. And and we were able to get, you know, some significant partners, some significant ambassadors, including Usain Bolt, and we became part of the sustainability program for the Rio Olympic Committee. And I think the film we made that year was shown on 9 airlines. And we started to partner hotels, and so the work has grown significantly since 2014. We've run it now during 7 major global sporting events, and we work with sporting governing bodies like the NFL, the IOC, the Commonwealth Games Federation. We've run it during the Hong Kong Rugby 7. So we basically, what I'm saying is we run it during major global sporting events. The idea is that, you know, they provide a platform to get a message that out all over the world. But as well as that, you know, obviously we're aware that during these major sporting events, it becomes an issue, because where there is an influx of hundreds of thousands of people, there is an increase of demand. So that's the work I do.
Very intriguing where you've been, what you've done. It's somewhat redundant to say that there are challenges in your world. I can just imagine at this scale, and with not just this scale of a market, this scale of a problem, that you have a lot of challenges. Be so kind as to tell us a little bit about what some of your biggest challenges are to getting to the heart of your mission.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like you were saying, there are the same challenges for a CEO in the third sector as a CEO in the private and public sectors, like management, strategic plans, budgets, cash flow, marketing. But I think there are probably more challenges faced by the third sector, with the whole idea of sort of fundraising and public perception, the trust of a charity, regulation, projects working on lean budgets, with small. When I say small, I have a small team. Really, I call us a small giant. I have a team of 5. We run these campaigns around major global sporting events. But those 5 people, my team, they are so they're all different. They all have different skill sets, and because of that, we work well, and they are very effective in what they do. And then what we do is we contract out. So we contract out, website, art and design, production, video production. We contract out PR, we contract out social media. And that way I get a nice mix, because I can change those servers every 2 years, for example. But I think probably the biggest challenge is the fundraising element. And I think the key is, as with in the private sector as well, that it is actually all about relationships, and I think that for us I think for us, what's vital for us is to, which we've managed to do, is to have partners that will go the journey with us. So, for example, we have other NGOs that partner with us, not only financially, but they can give us, greater impact. For example, in the government, let's say, in different countries around the world, we partner with airlines. We have airlines like British Airways and American Airlines and Cathay Pacific that will work with us regularly. We have hotel chains like Hilton International and the Radisson Blu Group and Marriott that will work with us. But obviously the more funding you have, the greater impact you can have.
The idea of your challenge being connected not just to the issue, but to the resources that you need to get to the issue, I don't think is really uncommon, but it is nonetheless a challenge. So you've been leading an organization since 2014, but I'm believing and assuming that that's not where your leadership journey began, that you've been in leadership roles at the BBC and other places that you've been at. Share with us a little bit about some of those leadership lessons, tackle some of those large challenges, some of those leadership lessons that you have learned along your way.
Yeah, I think my sort of key lessons learned, as far as leadership skills are concerned, is the importance, of creating and forging long-term relationships. Because the new world of work, as you know, it's all about the network, and that's irrespective of the sector we're working in. Today's workplace is all about the network, not just in a technology sense, although it's crucial, but also in the context of people and organizations. So, I think a key skill is forging long-term relationships and sort of moving into, for me, moving into new environments with an open mind to cultural shifts. Because if you think about it, with the campaigns that I'm running, it's working. We can work in America with the Super Bowls, and then we go across. For example, now I'm just about to go to Tokyo, because we're going to set up the campaign during the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics for next year. last year we ran it during 4 major sporting events. We ran it during, the Super Bowl in Minneapolis, so that's American culture. Then we ran it during Hong Kong Rugby Sevens, Asia. So that we also ran it during the South Korea Winter Games. South Korea, very different culture. And then the Commonwealth Games in Australia. So I think it's being open-minded to cultural shifts, and I think then from a personal perspective, it includes the importance of research and planning before starting any project, and therefore having measurable outcomes and indicators. We invest time here in this office in developing and producing research mapping reports in order to really know the right direction to go in. And also, I think the importance of teamwork. It's very important for me to create an atmosphere where people want to come to work, where they're happy to work and therefore work hard. And I think it's using today, it's all about soft skills, especially where there is a conflict. And I also think, for me as a leader, I have an open door. I think it's very important that everybody feels listened to, because I think that's where you develop as a person. It's about empowering, making you feel empowered, focusing on your strengths, because we all have strengths and weaknesses. But where it doesn't help is where a leader focuses on your weakness. So let's focus on your strength, and that way you will develop as a person. Because I think one of the things I've learned as a leader is it's okay to say, actually, that's not my skill set. My strength isn't that. My strength is this. Your strength is that. And that's okay to say that to yourself. I mean, I have staff members, who have, strengths that I don't have. So I think that's very freeing as a leader. In other words, yes, like I said, to focus on strengths rather than weaknesses. And, it's identifying our competencies and focusing on them. And the other thing is, I'd like to say, because I also do some mentoring on the MBA course. And one of the things that comes up time and again is the importance of work-life balance. And I think that's key also, because there's so much pressure today in the workplace to put in long hours and to produce, and the bottom line. And, I think we are also becoming more and more aware about mental health. And I think it's important that as a leader, you set a precedence to make sure that everyone, to make sure your team have that work-life balance, and that you're seen to have it as well. For example, I take a Wednesday afternoon off a month to go and do an art class. Art is my hobby, and I think it's good for my team to see that. I also have flexibility for them working from home sometimes. Sometimes people can get more done. So I think that the importance, it's a big challenge, but I think the importance of work-life balance is key as well.
Great stuff. These are lessons that are replicable in a lot of different areas. I'd like you to drill down into that just a little bit more. I'm interested to hear your thinking around sort of your approach, your style in leadership. That how do you see your role as being a leader?
I suppose I've just touched on that, really. My role in being a leader, I'm a visionary. I'm a social entrepreneur. So to work with me, you have to have a high appetite of risk. Not everyone has that. My board has to have a high appetite of risk, but then I think there has to be balance. There has to be balance on a board, and there has to be balance in the team. So in my team members, not all of them have that. But what everyone learns to do is to sort of, I think they've learned trust. It's trust, isn't it? It's building up trust. I think trust is very important. And trust comes from respect, and that your actions meet your word and vice versa. So I think that's I think that's very important. I think, we're all different personalities. I do what I do. I'm a natural leader. I have been since school. It's just, I think we all have leadership qualities, but some people find they can naturally lead. I'm somebody who I will listen to everybody's opinion. I think it's very important. I mean, we're a team of 5, but often my team is way bigger than that, because what happens is that when we're running a campaign, let's say like we are in Tokyo, we will partner with an NGO in Tokyo that then represents us. So I'm immediately coordinating and leading them in this vision for its penalty. And the same then goes with the hotels and the training, the training to spot human trafficking. So you've suddenly, there's a huge collaboration. So I'm managing my team, but then I'm also managing what's going on in that country. It's the airlines, it's what's happening at the airports, it's what's happening, the training of taxi drivers and who's going to be doing that and what NGOs on the ground are able to provide that. And then you're coordinating with the hotels and the training of staff to spot human trafficking. And then you're also coordinating with the host committee. So it is, I think, as a leader, I am naturally, I think, a facilitator. I'm somebody I'm action and I like to drive things, but then I need to surround myself with people that can do things that I can't. So I have somebody who's a campaign director who's very strong on art and design and video and vision, and then I have somebody else who's very strong on research and advocacy. So I think as a leader, as I said, I think I've said earlier, it's important to know your strengths and weaknesses as a leader, and it's okay to say, actually, that's not my strength. So so I think for me, it's the ability to see, and I'm a great person. I like to check and double check. I won't micromanage, but I have to be on top of everything. You've got the vision, you've got the strategy, you've got to be open to the fact that might change. You're constantly reviewing your budgets, and then obviously not only that, but I've also got to make sure that we've got enough money coming in. So I think as a leader, it's having your finger on all the buttons, but at the same time, it's providing an atmosphere where everybody feels empowered and listened to.
It's very interesting, this whole idea of delegating and validating. You delegate what needs to be done, but if you don't watch it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get done. I don't care how it's done. It needs to get, the product is what you're working for. Now, Sarah, I'd like to take you to the next place. You'd like to think that it's as easy as putting a quid in the slot and picking out which soft drink you want, pressing the button, and bang, there it is. But the reality of that doesn't work quite like that. So what remains to be done in your world? I would imagine that's probably a program all by itself, because it would seem to me that just my limited worldview, this is an area that we are just getting to be aware of, much less address. I think even though a lot of times this is an issue that has been a millennium, we're at a place now where you're talking about doing events and doing awareness and on-the-ground work all over the world. Tell me a little bit about what sort of remains to be done in your world. What more do you need to do before you get to your objective or fulfill your passion or whatever that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us to really complement campaign and for long-term systematic change for child protection, I mentioned this legislation, the extraterritorial legislation, and our research, we've completed a research mapping report recently following the campaign we ran during the Commonwealth Games in Australia. And that shows that of the 53 countries in the Commonwealth, only 13 countries had this legislation. So we've launched an exciting project just last week in the Cyprus High Commission, with a lot of the high commissioners from those countries, from those 53 countries, from the countries that don't have the legislation, together with UNICEF, together with World Vision, and together with the Royal Commonwealth Society, who we're partnering with, who can bring the heads of state around the table. And also we're partnering with Thomson Reuters, whose part of their CSR is something called trust law. And in 180 countries, they have law firms and solicitors that will give their time pro bono to such a project as this. And the idea is that we see as many of those countries in the Commonwealth that don't have that legislation, enact that legislation and implement that legislation over the next 4 years. So that's sort of my next big, hairy, audacious goal, I think.
What an intriguing, insightful, and poignant conversation. I'm going to put you on the spot just one more time. And if you would have something to say, sort of in summary and conclusion, to new leaders that are emerging, or leaders which may have some awareness in this area or just have some interest, do you have some final thoughts or message that you'd like to give to these folks?
Yeah, I think in whatever you're going to do, whatever work, whether you're going into the private or public sector, you can make a difference socially as well. And I think the new generation are a lot more, socially aware than than I was. But I think also it's remembering that, today we live in the age of what I call digital disruption. So for example, Airbnb is the largest accommodation provider in the world, but own no hotels. Uber is one of the largest taxi companies in the world, and they own no taxis. Amazon is one of the largest kind of online traders, but owns no shops. And, Skype, you can go on about Skype, the impactful telecommunications, owns no network structure. Facebook, largest community in the world, but doesn't own any houses or villages. And then similarly, it's a penalty. What we do, I think, as I've explained, we're a global campaign protecting children and vulnerable people from exploitation and trafficking all over the world, around major global sporting events. And we impact on average 155 million people per campaign. And yet, we're a small giant, but we're able to do that because of the digital disruption. Does that make sense? So don't limit yourself, because today, the world as we know it has changed.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk by Pragmatic Leaders. J.R. Klein is an Oxford-published author, speaker, and global business consultant. JR Global specializes in socially responsible business consulting. To learn more, visit jrglobal.co. Thank you for listening.